All right, I'm going to go through a few examples from IXL so that you guys can see what you're doing here in BB8 in case you're having a little bit of trouble. So for this first question, we've got f squared minus 6f minus 16. So f, come on, let's see, there we go. F squared minus 6f minus 16 equals 0. The equation's already equal to 0, so we don't have to move anything to the left or right. What we're going to have to do over here on the left-hand side is we've got to factor this into two sets of parentheses. Okay, so f squared, to get f squared, I'm going to have an f and a f. And then I need to think of the numbers I could multiply together to get negative 16. So for negative 16, I could do negative 16 and 1. I could multiply 2 times negative 8. I could do negative 4 times 4. And as I'm looking at these, that the 2 and negative 8 is looking like what I should probably use, because 2 plus negative 8 would give me negative 6, which is the middle number that I have. Now that only works whenever you've just got a f and f. If there was a number in front of this f squared right here, then it wouldn't work. But if I do plus 2 right here and minus 8 right here, then I've got this set up. So if I check it, I'm going to use a different color over here so we can check. To check what I've got here, if I do f times f, I get f squared. F times negative 8 is minus 8f. Then I'm going to do 2 times f, which is going to give me plus 2f. And then last, I'll do 2 times negative 8, which will give me negative 16. If I put that together, I've got f squared. Negative 8 plus 2 gives me negative 6f minus 16, which is what I started with, so I know I factored correctly. Now, I did that in a different color because that's just my work to check to make sure that I factored correctly. I'm not done solving the problem because I want to get answers for these where I've got f equals 7 or f equals 32 or something like that. In this case, I know f plus 2 has to equal 0 and f minus 8 has to equal 0. So I could subtract 2 from both sides, and so f will equal negative 2. And then over here, I could add 8 to both sides, and f is going to equal positive 8. So I've got two answers. I've got negative 2 and positive 8. So if I go over here to IXL, let's see if it'll let me. How do I get it to keyboard? Negative 2, and then I believe to type those answers in, we are going to hit a comma, and we're going to do 8. I believe that's how IXL does this. And so that one we got right. So we will continue on here. The next one is going to be g squared minus 19g plus 18. So g squared minus 19g plus 18 equals 0. Again, it already equals 0, so I'm going to break this into two parentheses. And so I have to have a g and a g here. My 18, if I think of numbers I could multiply to get a positive 18, I should notice here I'm going to have to use a negative and a negative in order to get a positive 18, but yet have that negative there in the middle. So I could use negative 1 times negative 18. I could use negative 2 times negative 9. I could use negative 3 times negative 6. And I think that's everything for 18. negative 1 and negative 18, I know you can't read that well there, but negative 1 and negative 18 is the one that we want to use because negative 1 plus negative 18 gives you negative 19. So we would put minus 1 minus 18. And if I check to make sure that this is right, if I check, g times g is g squared, and then g times negative 18 is negative 18g, and then negative 1 times g is negative g, and then negative 1 times negative 18 is positive 18. And if I put that negative 18 and that negative g together right there, I'm going to get negative 19, which is what I started with up here at the beginning. So I have factored correctly. Now that part is not part of solving the problem, it's just checking to make sure you factored correctly. So then I've got g minus 1 has to equal 0, or I could have g minus 18 equals 0. And so here I will add 1 to both sides, so g will equal positive 1, and right here g will equal positive 18, just adding that 18 to both sides. Perfectly fine if you want to do that part in your head. Let's type in our answers real quick. Let's see. 1, 18, and that one is correct. All right, here is another one. I'm going to do this real quick in my head just because I'm going to see if it goes to the more difficult ones. So that one's going to be 2 and 8. I believe 2 and 8. I'm just doing that in my head so we can get to some harder ones real quick. All right, let's see, that one is going to be negative 6 and negative 4. Oh, no, that's positive. Oh, no, okay, sorry. I did that. I was trying to do that in my head. I'm making it worse. All right, here's another one that's a little bit different. We've got f squared plus 22f. This one is a lot different. This is like the ones we did at the very first of the notes yesterday, because this one does not have a last term. So what happens with this, both of these terms have f's, so we're just going to factor out an f, a greatest common factor. And so then we will have f plus 22 in the parentheses. So what I'm doing there is I'm just dividing both of these by f, pulling the f out and putting it out front, and then I'm setting, then I will be left with f plus 22 inside the parentheses. So now I will take this f right here and I'll set it equal to 0, and then I'll have f plus 22, and I'll set that equal to 0.
Sorry.
And then...
Mom, can I look at TV? Can I look at picture?
Hold on, I'm making a video. And so f will equal negative 22. And so if we go over here and type this in, we've got 0 and negative 22 as our answers. That is correct. It's given us another one here. Another one here that's missing that last term. So I've got t squared plus 50t equals 0. So both of these terms have t's. So I can factor out a t. I'm going to divide both things by t and write that out front. And that'll leave me with just one t.
Hey, Mom, can I look at pictures for a minute? 5 minutes.
Will equal 0. And so here, t will equal 0, and t plus 50 will equal 0, and then t equals negative 50. Right there, so we've got 0 and negative 50. 0 and negative 50. Okay, here we're getting another one of these same ones. We don't have a last term, so w squared plus 14w equals 0. We can just factor out a w out of that. So we'll have w minus 14 whenever we do that. And so we'll get w equals 0. It's perfectly okay here with me. If you think y minus 14 equals 0, you're going to add the 14 to both sides. So you could just say w equals 14. And then you would type in your answers. So type in those answers. 0. 14. Oh my, why is that wrong? Oh, because I wrote a minus and it was a plus in the problem. Ugh, I keep making myself go backwards. Okay, this one gets us back to one that has all three terms. So we've got j squared plus 12j plus 11 equals 0. And so we're going to have to factor into two binomials for this. To get j squared, we're going to have a j and a j. To get 11, the only thing we can multiply to get 11 is 11 and 1. Or I could do negative 11 and negative 1, but I see a positive 12 in the middle there, so that's not what I want to do. So I'm going to have plus 1 plus 11. And so j plus 1 equals 0, and j plus 11 equals 0. So j equals negative 1 whenever you subtract that 1 from both sides. And then here, when you subtract that 11 from both sides, j equals negative 11. Okay, so let's type in those answers real quick. Negative 1 and negative 11. Okay, this one, we've got all three terms. We've got q squared plus 7q plus 12 equals 0. So I've got q and q. All right, for 12, there's a lot of things I could multiply together to get 12. I could do 12 times 1. I could do 2 times 6. I could also do 3 times 4. And so in this case, 3 and 4 is going to give me 7. So that's going to be my best bet. On the last one, I forgot to show the check of that. You don't have to write it down. I usually do it in my head. Q squared plus 4q plus 3q plus 12. That is going to give you q squared plus 7q plus 12 whenever we put it back together. So that tells you that you did this, factored this correctly. So q plus 3 has to equal 0, and q plus 4 has to equal 0. So over here we've got to subtract 3 from both sides, and we'll get q equals negative 3. And for this equation, we got to subtract 4 from both sides, so q is going to equal negative 4. Okay, so we got negative 3 and negative 4. Let's type those in real quick. And that is correct. I'm going to pause this a second and skip ahead so that I can... Okay, so I've skipped ahead a little bit. You can see I've gotten to one of the more difficult problems. Probably somewhere around a SMART score of 60, you're going to see this happen. And I've got 5z squared minus 18z plus 9 equals 0. And what makes this problem more difficult is you have a number in front of your z squared. So for this problem, we're still going to factor like we were doing. we're going to have a 5z times z. But we're going to have to do a lot more guessing check with this because numbers I can multiply to get 9. Notice I've got a positive right here with the 9, which tells me the signs have to be the same. My 18 is negative, which tells me both of these signs here have to be negative. So to get a positive 9, I could do negative 3 times negative 3. I could also do negative 1 times negative 9. And so I have to find one of these that will work. Let's start trying the negative 3 and the negative 3. And so you have to double check to make sure that you factored correctly because it's a lot more difficult to know that you factored correctly. 3 and 3 does not give you 18 and it's not going to. So you have to multiply this back to make sure it's factored correctly. And if it's not, then you'll have to change it. So 5z times z is 5z squared. And then 5z times negative 3 is negative 15z. And then negative 3 times z is negative 3z. And then negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. And when we put that together, we get 5z squared minus 18z plus 9, because those two middle terms, the negative 15 and negative 3, is going to give us negative 18. That is what we started with, so we know we factored correctly. Now, you are going to have to finish solving here, which is a little bit longer for these, but not too bad. So you've got 5z minus 3 has to equal 0, and z minus 3 has to equal 0. I'm going to solve this one over here to the right first because it is easier. So I'm going to add 3, and so z equals 3. And then over here, for this one, I'm going to add 3, which gives me 5z equals 3. And I'm going to divide by 5. So for that one, I'm going to end up with z equals 3/5. So I've got two answers, 3/5 and 3. And so when I type those in, let's see, I need 3/5 and 3, and hopefully that's going to go through all right. Okay, good. All right, I'm going to just type the answer in for this one because I want some of those harder ones. Okay, let's look at this one. This one is a little bit weird. It's only got 2 terms. So there's a couple ways that you can solve this problem. I think the easiest way to solve this problem is actually not by factoring. Okay, so you could add 1 to both sides in this one. And so you get 144 u squared equals 1. And then you divide by 144. And so u squared would equal 1 over 144. And then you would take the square root of both sides. And so u would equal plus or minus. And the square root of, when you take the square root of a fraction, you just take the square root of the top number and the square root of the bottom number. So the square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 144 is 12. So you get 1/12. So you've got positive 1/12 and negative 1/12 as your answers. So for this, to type that in, it would look like this. You would have 1/12, and then you would also have negative 1/12. And that is our answer for that one. For that one, let me just show you real quick. You could have also done this, 144 u squared minus 1 equals 0. You also could have factored it like this. You could do 12u and 12u. And if you do a plus 1 and a minus 1 there, then it's going to end up working because 12u squared times 12u times 12u is 144 u squared. Mom, then you would have a minus 12u and here plus 12u, and then minus 1. Okay, so if you put those together, these two cancel out right here, and so you get 144u squared minus 1, so you could set each one of those equal to 0. 12u plus 1 equals 0. 12u minus 1 equals 0, and so that's 12u equals negative 1. Divide by 12, u equals 1, negative 1 over 12. And over here, 12u equals 1. And then here, u, and you'll get 1 over 12 here. So that's another way you can get those two answers. I think the first way is a little easier, but it's up to you on what you want to do. All right, let's look at this next one, and we'll probably stop after this one. This is another one of those more difficult problems. You've got 3m squared plus 17m plus 14 equals 0. So to solve this, you are going to have to break this into two binomials. And to get 3m squared, the only things you can multiply to get 3 are 3 and 1. So you're going to have 3m and 1m right here. For 14, we could use 1 and 14. We could use 2 and 7. Okay, so typically I usually pick the numbers closer together. They just happen to be right more often. So I'm going to try right here a plus 2 and a plus 7. Okay, so now I've got to check to see if that worked. So if I distribute here, 3 times m is 3m squared. 3m times 7 is 21m. 2 times m is 2m. And then 2 times 7 is 14. And whenever I put 21 and 2 together, I'm going to get 23. That is not the 17 that I need up here. So that tells me that this is not correct. So I'm going to back up here the 2 and the 7 before I give up on the 2 and 7. What I want to do is switch where they're at. I want to put the 7 right here and the 2 right here. So when I try that, I've now got 3m squared. When I do 3m times m, then I've got 3m times 2, which is going to give me 6m. I've got 7 times m, so that's plus 7m, and then 7 times 2, which is 14. Now, 6 and 7 only gives me 13, so that is not correct. I need 17 as that middle number, so 7 and 2 is not going to work. I'm going to have to try 1 and 14. So let me erase what I've got here. Okay, and let's try 1 and 14. So I am going to put plus 14 plus 1, or you could switch them, but I can see that this is going to work because I've done a lot of these. So 3m times m is 3m squared. 3m times 1 is plus 3m. 14 times m is plus 14m. And 14 times 1 is 14. And right here, 3 and 14 is 17, so that is factored correctly. So we need to take each one of our factors now, 3m plus 14, and set it equal to 0. We also need to take our m plus 1 and set it equal to 0. I'm going to solve that second one first because it just looks easier. So if I subtract 1 from both sides, I get m equals negative 1. Over here, I've got to do minus 14, minus 14. So 3m equals negative 14. And I'm going to divide by 3, divide by 3. So m equals negative 14 over 3. And so I'm going to have negative 14 over 3. And then I will also have a negative 1 as my answers. And hopefully we've done everything right. We have. And so we will continue on. Let's go ahead and do this next one. I've only done one of these, and then I'm going to quit. So here we've got 6d squared minus 294 equals 0. So on this one, I would not factor. I would add that 294 to both sides. I can do that because it's just a number. And so I get 6d squared equals 294. And I'm going to divide both sides by 6 here. And let's grab the calculator real quick to see that 294 divided by 6 is 49. And then if I take the square root of both sides, then I'm going to get d equals, remember we got to put a plus or minus 7 right here. And so when I type in the answers, I have to type in 7, comma, -7. So +7 and -7. And that gets us the answer. And so you could continue on here. They are going to get more difficult as you go. I'm going to do this one last one. I know I said that 2 more ago. You can stop the video if you're tired of listening to this. But 28j squared plus 35j minus 63 is going to equal 0. This one's a more difficult one to do. So you're going to have to factor. And to get 28, I could multiply 1 and 28. I could multiply 2 and 14. I could multiply 4 and 7. And I think that's everything for that one. So I'm going to try 4j and 7j. To get -63, I could multiply -9 times 7. I could also multiply -3 times 21. Or, of course, I can always use -1 and 63. So let's try -9 plus 7. Okay. So if I do this, I'm just realizing I could have done a greatest common factor. All of those are divisible by 7, and that would have made the problem a lot easier. But we can do it this way also. So if we do 4j times 7j, we get 28j squared. 4j times 7 is +28j. -9 times 7 is -63j. And then we get that -63 on the end. So for 28 minus 63, that gives us -35. So we're really close to having the right answer here. What we could do here is we can just switch that negative and positive for these two. And so we could make this, instead of being a, so which one did we even have? That was a positive, a -9. So let's make that a +9 and a -7. So it would make this -28 and +63. And so then you would get the correct answer for this one. So you would have 4j plus 9 equals 0. You'd also have 7j minus 7 equals 0. And so if you solve both of those over here, you'll move the 9 over. 4j equals -9. And then you'll divide by 4. So j would equal -9 over 4. You also over here would add your 7. So 7j would equal 7. You divide by 7 on both sides. And so j would equal 1. So for our answers, we would get 1 and -9 over 4. And that's correct. And then you would continue on. Gosh, I keep seeing things that I just need to tell you one more thing about. If you look at this last problem right here, I'm not even going to do the whole problem, but you got 70v squared equals -22v. You can't do these problems if they're not equal to 0. So the very first thing you would want to do is move that 22v over to the other side. So you would have 70v squared plus 22v equals 0. And so once you do that, you've got a greatest common factor. You could just pull out the v, or you could pull out a 2v there. And so that would give you 70v plus 22. And then you could set each one of those equal to 0. So make sure that your problem is equal to 0 before you start trying to factor.